5. Ensure that when outside visual references are used, they are reliable, fixed points on the Earth's surface. 6. Avoid sudden head movement, particularly during takeoffs, turns, and approaches to landing. 7. Be physically tuned for flight into reduced visibility. Ensure proper rest, adequate diet, and, if flying at night, allow for night adaptation. Remember that illness, medication, alcohol, fatigue, sleep loss, and mild hypoxia are likely to increase susceptibility to spatial disorientation. 8. Most importantly, become proficient in the use of flight instruments and rely upon them. Trust the instruments and disregard your sensory perceptions. The sensations that lead to illusions during instrument flight conditions are normal perceptions experienced by pilots. These undesirable sensations cannot be completely prevented, but through training and awareness, pilots can ignore or suppress them by developing absolute reliance on the flight instruments. As pilots gain proficiency in instrument flying, they become less susceptible to these illusions and their effects. Optical illusions. Of the senses, vision is the most important for safe flight. However, various terrain features and atmospheric conditions can create optical illusions. These illusions are primarily associated with landing. Since pilots must transition from reliance on instruments to visual cues outside the flight deck for landing at the end of an instrument approach, it is imperative that they be aware of the potential problems associated with these illusions and take appropriate corrective action. The major illusions leading to landing errors are described below. Runway width illusion. A narrower than usual runway can create an illusion that the aircraft is at a higher altitude than it actually is, especially when runway length to width relationships are comparable. Figure 17.7. The pilot who does not recognize this illusion will fly a lower approach, with the risk of striking objects along the approach path or landing short. A wider than usual runway can have the opposite effect, with the risk of the pilot leveling out the aircraft high and landing hard or overshooting the runway. Runway and terrain slopes illusion. An upsloping runway, upsloping terrain, or both can create an illusion that the aircraft is at a higher altitude than it actually is. Figure 17.7. The pilot who does not recognize this illusion will fly a lower approach. Downsloping runways and downsloping approach terrain can have the opposite effect. Featureless terrain illusion. An absence of surrounding ground features, as in an overwater approach over darkened areas or terrain made featureless by snow, can create an illusion that the aircraft is at a higher altitude than it actually is. This illusion, sometimes referred to as the black hole approach, causes pilots to fly a lower approach than is desired. Water refraction. Rain on the windscreen can create an illusion of being at a higher altitude due to the horizon appearing lower than it is. This can result in the pilot flying a lower approach. Haze. Atmospheric haze can create an illusion of being at a greater distance and height from the runway. As a result, the pilot has a tendency to be low on the approach. Conversely, extremely clear air, clear bright conditions of a high-altitude airport, can give the pilot the illusion of being closer than he or she actually is, resulting in a high approach that may result in an overshoot or go around. The diffusion of light due to water particles on the windshield can adversely affect depth perception. The lights and terrain features normally used to gauge height during landing become less effective for the pilot. Fog. Flying into fog can create an illusion of pitching up. Pilots who do not recognize this illusion often steepen the approach abruptly. Ground lighting illusions. Lights along a straight path, such as a road or lights on moving trains, can be mistaken for runway and approach lights. Bright runway and approach lighting systems, especially where few lights illuminate the surrounding terrain, may create the illusion of less distance to the runway. The pilot who does not recognize this illusion will often fly a higher approach. How to prevent landing errors due to optical illusions. To prevent these illusions and their potentially hazardous consequences, pilots can 1. Anticipate the possibility of visual illusions during approaches to unfamiliar airports, particularly at night or in adverse weather conditions. Consult airport diagrams in the chart supplement US, formerly Airport/Facility Directory, for information on runway slope, terrain, and lighting. End of page 17 to 10. 2. Make frequent reference to the altimeter, especially during all approaches, day and night. 3. If possible, conduct an aerial visual inspection of unfamiliar airports before landing. 4. Use Visual Approach Slope Indicator, VASI, or Precision Approach Path Indicator, PAPI, systems for a visual reference, or an electronic glide slope, whenever they are available. 5. Utilize the Visual Descent Point, VDP, found on many non-precision instrument approach procedure charts. End of page 17 to 11. 6. Recognize that the chances of being involved in an approach accident increase when an emergency or other activity distracts from usual procedures. 7. Maintain optimum proficiency in landing procedures. In addition to the sensory illusions due to misleading inputs to the vestibular system, a pilot may also encounter various visual illusions during flight. Illusions rank among the most common factors cited as contributing to fatal aviation accidents. Sloping cloud formations, an obscured horizon, a dark scene spread with ground lights and stars, and certain geometric patterns of ground light can create illusions of not being aligned correctly with the actual horizon. Various surface features and atmospheric conditions encountered in landing can create illusions of being on the wrong approach path. Landing errors due to these illusions can be prevented by anticipating them during approaches, inspecting unfamiliar airports before landing, using electronic glide slope or VASI systems when available, and maintaining proficiency in landing procedures. Motion sickness. Motion sickness, or air sickness, is caused by the brain receiving conflicting messages about the state of the body. A pilot may experience motion sickness during initial flights, but it generally goes away within the first few lessons. Anxiety and stress, which may be experienced at the beginning of flight training, can contribute to motion sickness. Symptoms of motion sickness include general discomfort, nausea, dizziness, paleness, sweating, and vomiting. It is important to remember that experiencing air sickness is no reflection on one's ability as a pilot. If prone to motion sickness, let the flight instructor know. There are techniques that can be used to overcome this problem. For example, avoid lessons in turbulent conditions until becoming more comfortable in the aircraft, or start with shorter flights and graduate to longer instruction periods. If symptoms of motion sickness are experienced during a lesson, opening fresh air vents, focusing on objects outside the airplane, and avoiding unnecessary head movements may help alleviate some of the discomfort. Although medications like Dramamine can prevent airsickness in passengers, they are not recommended while flying since they can cause drowsiness and other problems. Carbon monoxide, CO, poisoning. CO is a colorless and odorless gas produced by all internal combustion engines. Attaching itself to the hemoglobin in the blood about 200 times more easily than oxygen, CO prevents the hemoglobin from carrying oxygen to the cells, resulting in hypoxia. The body requires up to 48 hours to dispose of CO. If severe enough, the CO poisoning can result in death. Aircraft heater vents and defrost vents may provide CO a passageway into the cabin, particularly if the engine exhaust system has a leak or is damaged. If a strong odor of exhaust gases is detected, assume that CO is present. However, CO may be present in dangerous amounts even if no exhaust odor is detected. Disposable, inexpensive CO detectors are widely available. In the presence of CO, these detectors change color to alert the pilot of the presence of CO. Some effects of CO poisoning are headache, blurred vision, dizziness, drowsiness, and/or loss of muscle power. Anytime a pilot smells exhaust odor, or anytime these symptoms are experienced, immediate corrective action should be taken, including turning off the heater, opening fresh air vents and windows, and using supplemental oxygen if available. Tobacco smoke also causes CO poisoning. Smoking at sea level can raise the CO concentration in the blood and result in physiological effects similar to flying at 8,000 feet. Besides hypoxia, tobacco causes diseases and physiological debilitation that can be medically disqualifying for pilots. Stress. Stress is the body's response to physical and psychological demands placed upon it. The body's reaction to stress includes releasing chemical hormones, such as adrenaline, into the blood and increasing metabolism to provide more energy to the muscles. Blood sugar, heart rate, respiration, blood pressure, and perspiration all increase. The term stressor is used to describe an element that causes an individual to experience stress. Examples of stressors include physical stress, noise or vibration, physiological stress, fatigue, and psychological stress, difficult work or personal situations. Stress falls into two broad categories: acute, short-term, and chronic, long-term. Acute stress involves an immediate threat that is perceived as danger. This is the type of stress that triggers a fight or flight response in an individual, whether the threat is real or imagined. Normally, a healthy person can cope with acute stress and prevent stress overload. However, ongoing acute stress can develop into chronic stress. Chronic stress can be defined as a level of stress that presents an intolerable burden, exceeds the ability of an individual to cope, and causes individual performance to fall sharply. Unrelenting psychological pressures, such as loneliness, financial worries, and relationship or work problems, can produce a cumulative level of stress that exceeds a person's ability to cope with the situation. When stress reaches these levels, performance falls off rapidly. Pilots experiencing this level of stress are not safe and should not exercise their airman privileges. Pilots who suspect they are suffering from chronic stress should consult a physician. End of page 17 to 12. Fatigue. Fatigue is frequently associated with pilot error. Some of the effects of fatigue include degradation of attention and concentration, impaired coordination, and decreased ability to communicate. These factors seriously influence the ability to make effective decisions. Physical fatigue results from sleep loss, exercise, or physical work. Factors such as stress and prolonged performance of cognitive work result in mental fatigue. Like stress, fatigue falls into two broad categories: acute and chronic. Acute fatigue is short-term and is a normal occurrence in everyday living. It is the kind of tiredness people feel after a period of strenuous effort, excitement, or lack of sleep. Rest after exertion and 8 hours of sound sleep ordinarily cures this condition. A special type of acute fatigue is skill fatigue. This type of fatigue has two main effects on performance. 1. Timing disruption, appearing to perform a task as usual, but the timing of each component is slightly off. This makes the pattern of the operation less smooth because the pilot performs each component as though it were separate, instead of part of an integrated activity. 2. Disruption of the perceptual field, concentrating attention upon movements or objects in the center of vision and neglecting those in the periphery. This is accompanied by loss of accuracy and smoothness in control movements. Acute fatigue has many causes, but the following are among the most important for the pilot. 1. Mild hypoxia, oxygen deficiency. 2. Physical stress. 3. Psychological stress. 4. Depletion of physical energy resulting from psychological stress. 5. Sustained psychological stress. Sustained psychological stress accelerates the glandular secretions that prepare the body for quick reactions during an emergency. These secretions make the circulatory and respiratory systems work harder, and the liver releases energy to provide the extra fuel needed for brain and muscle work. When this reserve energy supply is depleted, the body lapses into generalized and severe fatigue. Acute fatigue can be prevented by proper diet and adequate rest and sleep. A well-balanced diet prevents the body from needing to consume its own tissues as an energy source. Adequate rest maintains the body's store of vital energy. Chronic fatigue, extending over a long period of time, usually has psychological roots, although an underlying disease is sometimes responsible. Continuous high stress levels produce chronic fatigue. Chronic fatigue is not relieved by proper diet and adequate rest and sleep and usually requires treatment by a physician. An individual may experience this condition in the form of weakness, tiredness, palpitations of the heart, breathlessness, headaches, or irritability. Sometimes chronic fatigue even creates stomach or intestinal problems and generalized aches and pains throughout the body. When the condition becomes serious enough, it leads to emotional illness. If suffering from acute fatigue, stay on the ground. If fatigue occurs in the flight deck, no amount of training or experience can overcome the detrimental effects. Getting adequate rest is the only way to prevent fatigue from occurring. Avoid flying without a full night's rest after working excessive hours, or after an especially exhausting or stressful day. Pilots who suspect they are suffering from chronic fatigue should consult a physician. Exposure to chemicals. When conducting pre-flight and post-flight inspections, pilots must verify that the fluid levels in their aircraft meet the levels specified for safe operations as stated in the pilot's operating handbook. These fluids include, but are not limited to, hydraulic fluid, engine oil, and fuel. It is important that every pilot recognize the potential hazards of working with these fluids as well as the recommended first aid measures to follow should any of these fluids come in contact with their eyes, skin, and/or respiratory system. As the specific first aid measures for dealing with exposure to these chemicals can vary by chemical type, it is important that every pilot be familiar with the location and use of the Material Safety Data Sheet, MSDS, for each chemical they encounter. The procedures described in the following sections are minimum guideline for first aid for each of the indicated scenarios. Ultimately, the pilot should consult the MSDS for first aid procedures specific to the type of chemical and exposure scenario. Hydraulic fluid. 1. Eye contact. Immediately flush the eyes with clean water and seek medical attention if irritation occurs. 2. Skin contact. Remove all contaminated clothing and thoroughly cleanse the affected areas with mild soap and water or a waterless hand cleaner. If irritation or redness develops and persists, seek medical attention. Should the hydraulic fluid get into or under the skin, or into any other part of the body, regardless of the appearance of the wound or its size, seek medical attention immediately. End of page 17 to 13. 3. Inhalation. If respiratory symptoms develop, move away from the source of exposure and into fresh air in a position comfortable for breathing. If symptoms persist, seek medical attention. 4. Ingestion. First aid is not normally required, however, if swallowed and symptoms develop, seek medical attention. Engine oil. 1. Eye contact. Immediately flush the eyes with clean water and seek medical attention if irritation occurs. 2. Skin contact. Remove all contaminated clothing and thoroughly cleanse the affected areas with soap and water. Launder contaminated clothing before reuse. 3. Inhalation. Move away from the source of exposure and into fresh air. If respiratory irritation, dizziness, nausea, or unconsciousness occurs, seek immediate medical attention. If breathing stops, assisted ventilation is required via a bag valve mask or cardiopulmonary resuscitation, CPR. 4. Ingestion. Seek immediate medical attention. If immediate medical attention is not available, contact a regional poison control center or emergency medical professional regarding the induction of vomiting or use of activated charcoal. Vomiting should never be induced to a person who is groggy or unconscious. Fuel. 1. Eye contact. Immediately flush the eyes with clean water for at least 15 minutes and seek medical attention immediately. 2. Skin contact. Remove all contaminated clothing and thoroughly cleanse the affected areas with mild soap and water or a waterless hand cleaner. If skin surface is damaged, apply a clean dressing and seek medical attention. If irritation or redness develops, seek medical attention. Launder contaminated clothing before reuse. 3. Inhalation. Move away from the source of exposure and into fresh air. If breathing stops, assisted ventilation is required via a bag valve mask or cardiopulmonary resuscitation, CPR. Once breathing is restored, the use of additional oxygen may be necessary. Seek medical attention immediately. 4. Ingestion. Seek immediate medical attention. Do not induce vomiting or take anything by mouth, as this may cause the material to enter the lungs and cause severe lung damage. Should vomiting occur, keep head below the hips to reduce the risks of aspiration. Monitor for breathing difficulties. Rinse out any material which enters the mouth until the taste is dissipated. Dehydration and heat stroke. Dehydration is the term given to a critical loss of water from the body. Causes of dehydration are hot flight decks and flight lines, wind, humidity, and diuretic drinks, coffee, tea, alcohol, and caffeinated soft drinks. Some common signs of dehydration are headache, fatigue, cramps, sleepiness, and dizziness. The first noticeable effect of dehydration is fatigue, which in turn makes top physical and mental performance difficult, if not impossible. Flying for long periods in hot summer temperatures or at high altitudes increases the susceptibility to dehydration because these conditions tend to increase the rate of water loss from the body. To help prevent dehydration, drink 2 to 4 quarts of water every 24 hours. Since each person is physiologically different, this is only a guide. Most people are aware of the 8 glasses a day guide. If each glass of water is 8 ounces, this equates to 64 ounces, which is 2 quarts. If this fluid is not replaced, fatigue progresses to dizziness, weakness, nausea, tingling of hands and feet, abdominal cramps, and extreme thirst. The key for pilots is to be continually aware of their condition. Most people become thirsty with a 1.5 quart deficit or a loss of 2% of total body weight. This level of dehydration triggers the thirst mechanism. The problem is that the thirst mechanism arrives too late and is turned off too easily. A small amount of fluid in the mouth turns this mechanism off and the replacement of needed body fluid is delayed. Other steps to prevent dehydration include: 1. Carrying a container in order to measure daily water intake. 2. Staying ahead, not relying on the thirst sensation as an alarm. If plain water is not preferred, add some sport drink flavoring to make it more acceptable. 3. Limiting daily intake of caffeine and alcohol, both are diuretics and stimulate increased production of urine. Heatstroke is a condition caused by any inability of the body to control its temperature. Onset of this condition may be recognized by the symptoms of dehydration, but also has been known to be recognized only upon complete collapse. End of page 17 to 14. To prevent these symptoms, it is recommended that an ample supply of water be carried and used at frequent intervals on any long flight, whether thirsty or not. The body normally absorbs water at a rate of 1.2 to 1.5 quarts per hour. Individuals should drink 1 quart per hour for severe heat stress conditions or 1 pint per hour for moderate stress conditions. If the aircraft has a canopy or roof window, wearing light-colored, porous clothing and a hat will help provide protection from the sun. Keeping the flight deck well ventilated aids in dissipating excess heat. Alcohol. Alcohol impairs the efficiency of the human body. Figure 17.8. Studies have shown that consuming alcohol is closely linked to performance deterioration. Pilots must make hundreds of decisions, some of them time-critical, during the course of a flight. The safe outcome of any flight depends on the ability to make the correct decisions and take the appropriate actions during routine occurrences, as well as abnormal situations. The influence of alcohol drastically reduces the chances of completing a flight without incident. Even in small amounts, alcohol can impair judgment, decrease sense of responsibility, affect coordination, constrict visual field, diminish memory, reduce reasoning ability, and lower attention span. As little as 1 ounce of alcohol can decrease the speed and strength of muscular reflexes, lessen the efficiency of eye movements while reading, and increase the frequency at which errors are committed. Impairments in vision and hearing can occur from consuming as little as 1 drink. The alcohol consumed in beer and mixed drinks is ethyl alcohol, a central nervous system depressant. From a medical point of view, it acts on the body much like a general anesthetic. The dose is generally much lower and more slowly consumed in the case of alcohol, but the basic effects on the human body are similar. Alcohol is easily and quickly absorbed by the digestive tract. The bloodstream absorbs about 80 to 90% of the alcohol in a drink within 30 minutes when ingested on an empty stomach. The body requires about 3 hours to rid itself of all the alcohol contained in 1 mixed drink or 1 beer. While experiencing a hangover, a pilot is still under the influence of alcohol. Although a pilot may think he or she is functioning normally, motor and mental response impairment is still present. Considerable amounts of alcohol can remain in the body for over 16 hours, so pilots should be cautious about flying too soon after drinking. Altitude multiplies the effects of alcohol on the brain. When combined with altitude, the alcohol from 2 drinks may have the same effect as 3 or 4 drinks. Alcohol interferes with the brain's ability to utilize oxygen, producing a form of histotoxic hypoxia. The effects are rapid because alcohol passes quickly into the bloodstream. In addition, the brain is a highly vascular organ that is immediately sensitive to changes in the blood's composition. For a pilot, the lower oxygen availability at altitude and the lower capability of the brain to use the oxygen that is available can add up to a deadly combination. Intoxication is determined by the amount of alcohol in the bloodstream. This is usually measured as a percentage by weight in the blood. 14 CFR Part 91 requires that blood alcohol level be less than 0.04% and that 8 hours pass between drinking alcohol and piloting an aircraft. A pilot with a blood alcohol level of 0.04% or greater after 8 hours cannot fly until the blood alcohol falls below that amount. Even though blood alcohol may be well below 0.04%, a pilot cannot fly sooner than 8 hours after drinking alcohol. End of page 17 to 15. Although the regulations are quite specific, it is a good idea to be more conservative than the regulations. Drugs. The federal aviation regulations include no specific references to medication usage. 2 regulations, though, are important to keep in mind. Title 14 of the CFR Part 61, Section 61.53 prohibits acting as pilot in command or in any other capacity as a required pilot flight crew member, while that person 1. Knows or has reason to know of any medical condition that would make the person unable to meet the requirement for the medical certificate necessary for the pilot operation, or 2. Is taking medication or receiving other treatment for a medical condition that results in the person being unable to meet the requirements for the medical certificate necessary for the pilot operation. Further, 14 CFR Part 91, Section 91.17 prohibits the use of any drug that affects the person's faculties in any way contrary to safety. There are several thousand medications currently approved by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, FDA, not including OTC, over-the-counter, drugs. Virtually all medications have the potential for adverse side effects in some people. Additionally, herbal and dietary supplements, sport and energy boosters, and some other natural products are derived from substances often found in medications that could also have adverse side effects. While some individuals experience no side effects with a particular drug or product, others may be noticeably affected. The FAA regularly reviews FDA and other data to assure that medications found acceptable for aviation duties do not pose an adverse safety risk. Drugs that cause no apparent side effects on the ground can create serious problems at even relatively low altitudes. Even at typical general aviation altitudes, the changes in concentrations of atmospheric gases in the blood can enhance the effects of seemingly innocuous drugs that can result in impaired judgment, decision-making, and performance. In addition, fatigue, stress, dehydration, and inadequate nutrition can increase an airman's susceptibility to adverse effects from various drugs, even if they appeared to tolerate them in the past. If multiple medications are being taken at the same time, the adverse effects can be even more pronounced. Another important consideration is that the medical condition for which a medication is prescribed may itself be disqualifying. The FAA will consider the condition in the context of risk for medical incapacitation, and the medication as well for cognitive impairment, and either or both could be found unacceptable for medical certification. Some of the most commonly used OTC drugs, antihistamines and decongestants, have the potential to cause noticeable adverse side effects, including drowsiness and cognitive deficits. The symptoms associated with common upper respiratory infections, including the common cold, often suppress a pilot's desire to fly, and treating symptoms with a drug that causes adverse side effects only compounds the problem. Particularly, medications containing diphenhydramine, e.g., Benadryl, are known to cause drowsiness and have a prolonged half-life, meaning the drugs stay in one's system for an extended time, which lengthens the time that side effects are present. Many medications, such as tranquilizers, sedatives, strong pain relievers, and cough suppressants, have primary effects that may impair judgment, memory, alertness, coordination, vision, and the ability to make calculations. Figure 17.9. Others, such as antihistamines, blood pressure drugs, muscle relaxants, and agents to control diarrhea and motion sickness, have side effects that may impair the same critical functions. Any medication that depresses the nervous system, such as a sedative, tranquilizer, or antihistamine, can make a pilot more susceptible to hypoxia. Painkillers are grouped into 2 broad categories: analgesics and anesthetics. Analgesics are drugs that reduce pain, while anesthetics are drugs that deaden pain or cause loss of consciousness. Over-the-counter analgesics, such as acetylsalicylic acid, aspirin, acetaminophen, Tylenol, and ibuprofen, Advil, have few side effects when taken in the correct dosage. Although some people are allergic to certain analgesics or may suffer from stomach irritation, flying usually is not restricted when taking these drugs. However, flying is almost always precluded while using prescription analgesics, such as drugs containing propoxyphene, e.g., Darvon, oxycodone, e.g., Percodan, meperidine, e.g., Demerol, and codeine, since these drugs are known to cause side effects such as mental confusion, dizziness, headaches, nausea, and vision problems. Anesthetic drugs are commonly used for dental and surgical procedures. Most local anesthetics used for minor dental and outpatient procedures wear off within a relatively short period of time. The anesthetic itself may not limit flying as much as the actual procedure and subsequent pain. End of page 17 to 16. Stimulants are drugs that excite the central nervous system and produce an increase in alertness and activity. Amphetamines, caffeine, and nicotine are all forms of stimulants. Common uses of these drugs include appetite suppression, fatigue reduction, and mood elevation. Some of these drugs may cause a stimulant reaction, even though this reaction is not their primary function. In some cases, stimulants can produce anxiety and mood swings, both of which are dangerous when flying. Depressants are drugs that reduce the body's functioning in many areas. These drugs lower blood pressure, reduce mental processing, and slow motor and reaction responses. There are several types of drugs that can cause a depressing effect on the body, including tranquilizers, motion sickness medication, some types of stomach medication, decongestants, and antihistamines. The most common depressant is alcohol. End of page 17 to 17.